You're listening to the 2017 Nelson Arts Festival Page and Blackmore Readers and Writers program. This session features Nicola Galloway in conversation with Judy Finn. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Welcome to the very first session of the 2017 Page and Blackmore Readers and Writers program. We're really happy to have you all here. With me here today is Nicola Galloway and Judy Finn. It's an honour to welcome Nicola. She's just released this gorgeous new book, Homegrown Kitchen, which has been attracting excellent reviews across the country. Nicola's a trained chef who's been writing and teaching about food for 15 years now. Her food focus is on creating family-friendly meals from homegrown and local seasonal produce, making the most of her quarter-acre paradise up the Brook Valley. She writes for Fairfax's Stuff, Mind Food, and also does all her own food photography. And interviewing her is Judy Finn. Judy's an ex-broadcaster, co-owner of Neudorf Vineyards in Upper Mootry, keen cook, enthusiastic gardener, and active with the Mootry Artisans. And I didn't introduce myself, sorry, I'm Naomi Arnold, the program coordinator for the Readers and Writers. So, yeah, sit back, relax, and enjoy what these two come up with. Thanks.
This is going to be so easy, isn't it? Lovely time to do it, an hour talking about food on a Friday. I'd just like to make one correction in the program for the Arts Festival. It describes me as a passionate foodie, and anyone who knows me knows that I would never say that. I would never use the word passionate, and foodie sounds like somebody who's snorting truffle oil somewhere. What I am is a very casual but keen cook in the home sense, and I'm also not an enthusiastic gardener. I'm an enthusiastic user of my partner's produce, which is not quite the same thing. So honesty will be the theme of the day here. Nicola's book is absolutely beautiful, and one of the things I really love about it, and we were talking about this early, the production values of it. It feels good, it smells good, it's got beautiful font. And talking to Nicola, I realised that, well, that's because it's basically her book from start to finish, not just her words. So perhaps we'll start off by asking you a little bit of the history of the book, and then why it is so beautiful.
Oh, okay. Homegrown Kitchen, sitting here, came about through Burton and, got to get this right, Potten and Burton, get the right way around. They made contact. I've did 2 books already with them, Cooking for Your Child and Feeding Little Tummies, and then they made contact with me again, maybe going back about 2.5 years, asking if I would like to do another book and what I'd like to do. And they basically said, free rein, I said, do you want a proposal? Robbie said, no, I trust that you'll create something beautiful. But, at that stage, I had my food blog, and that was doing quite well, and so I suppose he knew that, could see that I could photograph well and I could write well. So my kids were a bit little right at that stage, so I deferred it for about a year, but that gave me time to really, really get 100% sure about what I wanted to put into the pages, about the look and the feel of the book. I pored over cookbooks, looked at the fonts, looked at the style, looked at the page design, looked at the images, and when I went back to them and said, okay, I'm ready, I pretty much knew exactly what I wanted, and we sat down with, initially we sat down with a designer and just created the page layout of the fonts. And the thing with my recipes, if you've read my book or anything I write, is that my recipes are quite detailed, very detailed. And that's quite different than most recipe books. Usually you're dealing with about a 300-word maximum recipe, and mine are like 500 to 600, because I have my intro, I have the recipe, which is really detailed, and then I usually have like an extra information box at the bottom. So somehow we had to fit all that information onto one page, but we managed to do it. And I wanted the matte, we talked about the matte pages, and what else? I'm just trying to think about the production.
Well, I think for me, books, which is why I don't do Kindle, books are about feel, and it's the quality of the paper or the stock as they have that really
paper stock
helps you use it. But one thing I'd say about the care that you've put into the look of the book, it's also what I really enjoyed about it was the care to the recipes, because some of the recipes are not actually a recipe, but a way of cooking, which may be a bit challenging if you are not familiar with lacto-fermentation, for
Yep.
instance. Thank you for laughing.
Yes.
Because I
Yeah.
hadn't heard of it either.
Yeah.
But in an hour, we're going to know all about it and what a difference it's going to make to us. But I think that confidence you get where somebody's walked you through, it's like taking your hand and saying, you can do this. It's not that hard, and you'll be pleased with the results. So congratulations, because I did feel comfort. I felt like I could try that. And if you haven't got the book, the first recipe I did was the dairy-free pesto, which is totally delicious, and I will never make it the other way again.
With the miso. Miso added for the umami flavour.
That's right. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. So we'll talk a little bit about miso later, because I think it's a miracle. It's a miracle ingredient to have in the cupboard, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To add to so many
and
things.
there's local miso as
There
well.
is.
From local soybeans and Marlborough salt.
Isn't that fantastic?
Urban Hippie miso.
Yeah. Who sells it at the market on Saturday mornings. Right, so a little bit then about the history of the book and what you decided to put in, and because it's got a very definite theme to it. So perhaps you can explain how you settled on that theme.
So as I said, I had that year to really nut it over my head before I started the writing. And I had already been teaching, cooking workshops for probably 12 years, but I had, in the years leading up to the book, I had been focusing on particular subjects, which was fermentation, preserving, sourdough, low healthy baking, I suppose. I'm not about sugar-free, but about just the flavour of the food rather than it having to be full of sugar. So I already had a large amount of the content, and I suppose what I have to be able to add to that was that I had been teaching these subjects. I had my teaching notes, but I also had people ask me questions at those evenings, and I'd taken note of what people were asking me. So as I was bulking them out and writing about the subject, fermentation, sourdough, I could just think, okay, well, hang on, that trips people up, so I better elaborate on that. So initially, when I handed in the manuscript, Robbie rang me up and said, yes, we're going to have to add about 50 pages to this book because it had grown a large amount. And so the workshops is what laid the foundation, and then I suppose I just took them. That's half of the book is basically kitchen essentials, fermenting and preserving, and then we had breakfast, lunches, dinners, and desserts.
Which have been remiss. We're going to have questions at the end. It'll be 1/4 for questions at the end. But if there's anything specific to what we've talked about here, you're allowed to put your hand up and we'll ask you, and Nicola will answer it, as long as it's sort of not about your trip to Germany, but about what we're actually talking about on stage. It'll be great to hear from you. So it's fairly relaxed, so don't feel frightened to do that. So yes, going back to the history of, should we talk about fermentation? Because it's a huge subject. I'm sort of involved in fermentation in my private life. I've been doing that for about 40 years. But there's two big groups of fermentation, isn't it? There's bacterial fermentation, and then there's yeast fermentation. And so I'm more yeast.
Yeah. And with food, I would almost say that it's a lot of bacteria fermentation, but actually the magic really happens when it's bacteria and yeast. So, for example, yogurt is bacterial fermentation, while milk kefir is bacteria and yeast, which are quite similar products in themselves, though milk kefir is stronger in taste. But when you have the bacteria and the yeast together, so milk kefir or kombucha or many of those drinks, that's where the benefit of the probiotics is increased substantially. Just by having the two together.
A little bit more about that, though, because probiotics it's so the go at the moment, isn't it? And the best way to have it, obviously, is in your food.
It's in your food, yeah.
So do you want to talk a bit about why we should be cooking this way?
Well, I never like using the word should, because it makes you feel like you have to do it.
We could be cooking this way.
Could be doing. Fermentation. Okay, for me, how I got into fermentation and how I got into sourdough and all these traditional foods is that I had done chefing, I had and loved cooking, but found that really rich food was a bit too much for me to digest. And then I got very interested in nutrition. I just studied a diploma in nutrition, but I found like they were two kind of opposites. And particularly when you head into the nutrition world, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of diets, there's a lot of fads, and over the years, I suppose, I was confused, and I started to go, well, actually, okay, instead of it being like this is the latest thing, what did we do 100 years ago? Like, how did we prepare our bread? How did we preserve our food? Because the introduction of sugar, which is how we're preserving fruit these days, only really came in large quantities after the World War II. So if you go back before that, we were preserving using lactofermentation. Yeah, and lactofermentation has nothing to do with dairy. It's relating to the lactic acid producing bacteria. So that's actually what lactofermentation means. So in all produce, there is, and preferably organic produce, because once things are sprayed, they can kill off those bacteria. There's acid producing bacteria, which is what you were talking about the grapes earlier. We were talking about this earlier. That is what creates that spontaneous fermentation. So cabbages, fruit, anything that's really growing in the environment, it has this bacteria on its surface. And then when you ferment it and you add the salt to slow down the putrefaction of the produce before the fermentation begins. So if you were just to cut up some cabbage and pop it into a jar, within a day it's going to go off and it's going to be horrible. You add some salt to it at a particular ratio, which is what I talk about in the book. I don't say, like every other book seems to, go get a cabbage and add a tablespoon of salt to it. Well, how much does that cabbage weigh? A cabbage can be like this and it can be like this. So I'm more using, I'm giving you the ratios and the weight to weight of how to grab any quantity of produce and know how much salt you add to it. So the salt's going to slow down that breaking down of the food. And then within about 3 or 4 days, what can really vary depending on the climate, the fermentation begins. That fermentation drops the pH, and once the pH drops low enough, the lactic acid is produced from those lactic acid producing bacteria, and that's what basically preserves
it.
The food.
Because I think that I'm probably not alone in this. The fear about all this is going off.
Yeah.
And I'm reasonably, my daughter's sitting in the audience and she'll be rolling her eyes at this, but I'm reasonably relaxed. I just think it smells all right, it's fine. Always just scrape it off the top. It'll be But I mean, generally that's what we did. And there seems to be a generation of people, and I'd love to hear your comments on this, of people that are so aware of use by dates rather than best by dates. And I can remember when cleaning up my mother's house and going through the freezer, and somebody said, we were preparing dinner for the children that had all gathered there to do this job, and my sister-in-law looked at there's been in the freezer, the frozen peas. She said, "Look at the date on the frozen peas." And I said, "As far as I'm concerned, you could go to Ernest Shackleton's shed and eat the frozen peas. Yeah. It does not matter, is it? Is it going to matter?"
Yes and no. I mean, there's use by dates there for a reason.
I'm still here.
But the frozen peas, I think you would be okay with. But yeah, there are certain things, like particularly meat products, chicken, you do need to be very, very particular.
But there is a warning,
isn't
there, generally?
What's that?
In your own home kitchen, I think that's the big difference. In your home kitchen, you smell it. It's not covered by a sauce. Yeah. It's not when you go outside. Yeah. I won't go down this path, actually. I'm doing myself.
Don't know where this is heading. So use by dates. I suppose so when you look, I do agree that use by dates can be definitely a little bit on the lean side, particularly when it comes to cheese. I look at the use by date as like the, what is it? The best buy, or start thinking about eating it sometime after this date. I give it the squeeze test. But yeah, definitely there's foods, even canned foods and jarred foods with preservatives. But they have to do it. It's just really a food safety legality, I suppose. But when you're fermenting and preserving at home, you don't have those use by dates. So you have to, and that's when you have to start to use your senses. So you have to use your visual looking and smelling, and I think our smell is probably our biggest warning, sign. If in doubt, chuck it out. And that's why, what I said before about the ratios is that if you follow, so the ratios that I use is a 3% salt ratio, that if you follow that, it's very unlikely that you're going to have an issue, because 3% is enough to drop that pH down in that time. I have people come to my workshops often and say, "Oh, I've made sauerkraut several times and it's gone really mouldy." And I'm like, "Well, what did you? How big was the cabbage? How much salt?" They said, "Oh, yeah, just 1 cabbage to a tablespoon." I'm just putting some numbers out there to salt, and it's like, well, actually, if the cabbage was 2 kgs and you use that much salt, then you're not going to have the right ratio. But if the cabbage was really small and you have that much salt, you're going to have too much salt. And so I've tried to, sort of gone off track, but I've tried to give the information in my book and in my workshops that will give you, sure, you're not always going to get success, but hopefully about 95% chance of success. And then to check if it is okay, because things can happen. There might be something in the jar was dirty, or there was something on the cabbage that you didn't see. Okay, so it can go wrong. You're going to use your senses, and that's something which we've lost touch a little bit, is that intuitiveness with food.
Oh, I've still got it.
So I've got it. Yeah, I know, but we don't all have it. So it's. Yeah.
Tell me something about when we've made the sauerkraut, and I've just did this recently. So I've got the sauerkraut, and very proud, and it's fine. It's good to go. What do I do with it then after? I mean, I don't have the meals that require sauerkraut that much. I mean, I'm sure I'm just not being imaginative.
Yeah. Well, you probably could put it with a lot more than you think you can. Yeah. So I mean, I aim to at least once a day have some, and so I'll make various different. So I've got sauerkraut, kimchi, and then a lacto-fermented pickle, which is a brine-based ferment, and I'll have. Not all of those are always in the fridge, but ideally if I can, I do, because they last for months and months and months. And so when you've got various ones to choose from, then you can add it. So I often start my day with eggs, and I'll have a side of sauerkraut with it. Eggs, and it goes really well together. Or if I'm making a grilled sandwich for lunch, then I'll put either some kimchi or sauerkraut on the side, or the pickle. And then it'll really depend what we're having for dinner, but it's easy enough. Just jars go onto the table, and just decide at the time.
It's another condiment.
It is another condiment. It's just, I suppose, because I've been making ferments for so many years, to me it's just part of my life, and I can't, and I notice, it's been really good for my digestion and my health, so I just keep doing it. But I know if it's a new thing, it is remembering to do it. It's actually a little bit like gardening. I love gardening, but in the early years I'd forget to go and harvest the produce. I'd still go to the market and buy the produce, think, oh my gosh, I have that in the garden, what was I thinking? So it's just getting your head around using it rather than,
And kimchi, which is kind of addictive, isn't it?
Oh, so good. It's my favourite. Yeah. Even my son loves it. It's like spicy, but he just loves it.
It really does pack a punch, doesn't it? It's interesting that in winemaking, we often talk about Oh, we've got a question.
Yes. Yeah, so you need to use, so you have to always think back, traditional foods, what were we using? Because we've got, since World War II, we've had a lot of fondling of our food, if that's the right word, but you need to go back to a traditional type of salt, which would just be sea salt, rock salt, any type of salt that has not been tampered with, that's not had. Unfortunately, iodized salt doesn't work because the iodine will end up making your ferment quite slimy. So it's not so good. So yeah, if you're concerned about iodine, then you can actually add kelp or seaweed actually as an additional ingredient to it, or use it in other ways. So yeah, so it has to be a traditionally harvested, I suppose, salt. I just use Marlborough sea salt. It's just over there. Yeah, try and keep it as local. I often always try and find something that's local, New Zealand grown if I can. I mean, obviously not everything you can, so I'm not completely crazy about having to do that. But if I can get something locally and it's a reasonable price, then that would be my choice. Yeah.
Can we just move on a little? Oh, sorry, there's a question.
I grew up with that, and my mother used to do it. Used to put it in a pot. A crock, yeah. And grate it. Yeah. And the cabbage that they used to use was golden acre. Okay. That's the nice solid cabbage. Yeah. And then they just put the salt on top and weigh it down constantly over so many days. But they used to add something to it, like some seeds. I'm trying to figure out. Caraway seeds, usually. Yeah. I'm all for that. Yeah, my kids love sausages. They have a side of sauerkraut with it, and yeah, 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 a big yeah. I do. Yeah, I do notice that you get different results from the cabbage, different cabbages. I like red cabbage sauerkraut is really popular in sort of paleo worlds. However, my experience of using just red cabbage ends up with a very, very soft, not very delicious. But green cabbage seems to work fine, so I do half red and half green if I'm going to do a red one. So yeah, it's not always easy to find, like a particular type. So I try and give people, the best amount of to be able to go to the supermarket and get a cabbage that, but red cabbage, unfortunately, I find just by itself is really slimy. Just a tip, if you are grabbing some red cabbages, it might go a little slimy. There's another question down there. Oh, and there, yeah, yes. Yeah. 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 So there is a fear around food poisoning, and botulism is one is one to be concerned about. That's why I'm so particular about explaining using the right quantities, because if you don't use enough salt, which happens, I've had in the early days when I was teaching, I'd have friends checking my recipes for me, and some of them had issues, and a couple of times the biggest issue the main one that was happening is that a friend would be making the sauerkraut, she would put the right quantity in, and then she'd taste a little bit of the cabbage, and at that point it tastes incredibly salty. However, if you wait 3 or 4 weeks, which is how long you usually should wait for it to eat your sauerkraut, that the lactic acid takes over and the salt drops. But so what this particular friend did is she added more cabbage, and so she dropped the ratio down, and then her sauerkraut, of course, didn't work. So that's why I'm so particular about, if you're going to make it, you use the right quantity of salt. And then, of course, there's the question of, salt in the diet, we shouldn't have too much. That's why I wouldn't eat the sauerkraut within a week, because it would still be incredibly salty, but you wait 3 or 4 weeks, and it doesn't really taste that salty anymore. And the longer you wait, probably 3 months would be my ideal if I can get ahead of myself and make enough sauerkraut, would be the time. And then there's pretty much no saltiness. It's just sour because the lactic acid is just completely taken over. So I suppose to answer your questions, it's that, again, that nutrition confusion. There's just so many different ways of doing things. So I go back to tradition. How were they doing it? And I know we were going to talk about
bread. I'm just going to move on to...
Well, also about who's been my influences. Yeah, and so that would bring in... there's an American author called Sandor Elix Katz. Has anybody come across him? Yeah. So he's just... he's like the total pioneer on... Not the pioneer because, gosh, he didn't begin fermentation, but he wrote a book in the probably early 90s, I think, or late 90s, called Wild Fermentation. And I read his book inside out. He's got several books out now. And yeah, he's all about looking back at how we did it. And we don't have generally that intuitive sense anymore of knowing this size cabbage, whatever produce we're using, needs this much salt. He really laid down the ratios and all that. And so it just, if you follow that. The other one is Sally Fallon. What's the book called? Nourishing Traditions is another one. So that would be my food influences in the fermentation traditional food world. And then, there's heaps of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps the more general question might be to look at why we are what I call the ingestion industry, which is the fantastic thing we're going through at the moment, where no matter what it is we're eating or drinking, we're concerned about where it came from and what it's doing to us, which is affecting the wine industry, the beer industry, we all have different sorts of salts, we have different sorts of olive oil, we have different sorts of teas. Once upon a time in my childhood, there was only tea, and now we have a drawer of tea So there's so much interest in it, and it's intriguing and fascinating, but it's also kind of a job of work, I find, as well, because nothing is as simple. There's so many choices. So I guess I'd maybe talk about that simplification of that process, because just earlier when we were having a chat together, we talked about a program you might have seen on Netflix there's 4...
It's called Cooked.
Cooked with Michael Pollan, who's
seen it?
Wonderful. He does
Cooked.
air,
Fire,
water, and
Earth.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And the one that I love is the one on air, which is about bread. So maybe if we can just move on from fermentation and talk a bit about bread before...
I'm happy to answer questions later.
Yeah.
As
And
well,
Nicola
so,
will be doing what I think is fantastically called the Sourdough Tour, which sounds like a country rock band, doesn't it? But she's in everywhere from Takaka in the South Island.
No, not quite Takaka, sorry. Can't get there this time. Blenheim,
Yeah.
West Coast. Yeah, Nelson's full, sorry. Nelson, yeah.
Already?
Very fast, sorry.
You've got a star.
You like what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do more next year.
So perhaps just to talk about what Michael Pollan was talking about then and the way it's affecting gluten and our diet.
Yeah. So fermentation leading on from that is yeast bacterial fermentation for bread, which is probably my favourite area of fermentation. Sourdough bread it's absolute magic that you can take flour, water, salt, mix it in 24 hours. You can have this beautiful, crusty, soft, scented, chewy, flavoursome bread. Oh, I could go on about it forever. It's so good. You drooling?
Mm-hmm.
So in air he talks about. There's a question asked at one stage, because if you haven't seen Cooked or if you have access to Netflix, I highly recommend watching the 4-part series they produced with Michael Pollan, who's written The Omnivore's Dilemma and various other amazing... He's actually got a book called Cooked. It's based on that, elaborating from that. And in the... so he asked the question to one of these bakers, what about gluten-free? And the baker says, well, if you properly, correctly ferment grain, it basically reduces the gluten to non-existent. Which I must say, first of all, if someone is celiac, it's unfortunately the damage has been done. You can't go back to eating gluten breads. Well, that's what they're saying at the moment. But the issue with wheat and gluten has become quite a big issue, and it's very popular. Well, not popular as in that people are eating gluten-free because they are following a diet, but they find they feel better when they don't eat the gluten. My experience when I was gluten-free for many years, then I travelled to Greece, which we were talking about earlier, and I had this beautiful sourdough breads. This is in an island. And I was absolutely fine. There's no gluten-free over there, so I had to eat it. I didn't have to, but I decided I'd eat this beautiful bread. And I was absolutely fine. In the past, I'd get bloating. I would have a really sore tummy, various other things I don't want to talk about. And I was fine, absolutely fine with this sourdough bread produced in an island in Greece. So I started doing a bit of research into it, and there's one is the sourdough, which I'll talk about in a minute, but the other is the grain. The grains used, the wheat used in Europe is more of a heritage wheat. It's lower in gluten than the grain we have in New Zealand and America and Australia, so they've been hybridised to be a lot higher in gluten. And a lot of people, probably more of us than realise, find it very difficult to digest that wheat because it's not a natural, it's no longer the original food, it's been tampered with. And also, wheat was always... going back to all traditional ways of preparing bread, it was all fermented, either as a sourdough bread or a leaven or a slow rise, some way bread was always fermented, or sourdough. Yeah, I'm just trying to think what more to say about that.
Well, I guess the interesting thing that in that program that is quite horrifying, really, is that that doesn't need to be. It's a situation that doesn't need to be. It's because the wheat is no longer traditional wheat.
It's right, no longer traditional meat and no longer traditionally processed.
Yeah.
So there's two issues there.
And we don't really have an option in New Zealand, do we? That's because
No.
all our wheat is grown that way,
Yeah.
and it comes from that source.
No, yes and no. So I get all my grain from down in Canterbury through organic growers. There's terrace farms and there's Millmore Downs and there's biograins, and they're all growing organic grain down there. Some of them are, you have to talk to them about it, but some of them are more heritage grains, and I have no problem with them. Unfortunately, the most organic white flour, New Zealand white flour, is not good enough. It doesn't have the right protein content for good quality bread making. It's fine for anything else, but for bread making. So if you want to make a big, beautiful, freeform loaf, Australian wheat or Turkish wheat seem to be the only one that you can achieve that with. Yeah, it's a lot of experimentation in it.
Got a question?
Yeah.
Where could you source something like that in Nelson?
The wheat, yes. So the organic shop on Collingwood Street has it, and I'm sure the co-op, if that's still running. I just go directly to them and buy it from them. So you can just email them direct. Yep. If you go to my website and then there's, I think it's on the side panel somewhere, or if you look up suppliers on my website, so just search for that. I've got a whole page of all the links and emails for all that. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's in the back. It's in the back of the book. Yep.
Too.
All the suppliers in the back of the book. Yeah. So Terrace Farms and Millmore Downs. I personally go directly to Terrace Farms. I've got ordered from them for years, but they're both equally as good.
Because
Yeah.
I got your book. I really wanted to do the sourdough.
Okay. Yeah.
First of all, I had to make the
Starter.
sourdough,
Yeah.
But all I had was ordinary
Yeah.
whole flour.
Yeah.
And I certainly was able to keep I finally got
Yeah.
it at much more hours than
Yeah.
we were told.
Yeah.
But it was in the middle of winter.
Winter's not a good time to make a starter. Yeah.
I put
Yeah.
it in the hot water
Yeah.
fridge, and here I was going.
Yeah.
And I was able to make this bread for a few weeks.
Yeah.
I was so proud.
Yeah.
But it took me about 2 days
Okay.
to make a loaf of bread.
Because of the
And then suddenly
start.
it went funny, and I was wondering whether it was anything to do with the fact that the wheat was just, Pam's whole
Yeah.
thing or
So at my workshops, I always say, I don't really mind what you use for making your bread, but your starter you need to treat like a baby. Yeah, yeah. So I say to people, even if you don't want to go and use the organic flour for making the bread, you just need to go and buy, it will last you, months if you go get a 1 kg of good quality wholemeal flour. So to make a sourdough starter, the yeast is in our environment, but it's actually mostly on the grain. That's where it comes from. So the wild yeasts. Yeah. So if you're using non-organic grain, it can be very hard to get that spontaneous fermentation happening. Yeah.
And also for covering it to keep it right.
Yeah.
How would you cover it? Because I
Yeah.
had a sort of I had kind of a wee clothy thing.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
That would
Yeah.
be all right?
Yeah, I use a little linen cover. It's in the book. Yeah.
Was it something nasty?
Yeah. You don't need, you can even just put a lid on top. Don't screw it on. You can just have it sitting on top. Yeah. Yep, with the little beads. Yep. Yep. Yeah, okay. Any other questions at the moment?
I had a friend who said that their sourdough starter was the best introduction to parenthood they'd ever had. And so I think it's probably appropriate, isn't it?
Needs
You
a
sort of-
fair amount of attention. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
loving
once you get it started, it's
But
quite
you can't go away on
manageable.
holiday
Yeah, you
and forget
can.
about it.
Yeah, you just put it in the fridge.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. Yes, but it
Yeah,
is.
it can-
You think about it.
Yep.
Sulks.
Hmm?
It can sulk in the winter.
It can sulk. Yeah, it doesn't. That's why, again, I'd recommend using for feeding the starter a good quality flour. Yeah, because each time you feed it, you're adding in some more natural yeasts. So it's just you constantly learn more and more about it. It's a subject; it just doesn't end. Yeah, yeah. Make sourdough bread. Well, yes, there's Rodrigo. They're making bread locally, which is 100% sourdough. But they're not using what I would say the best flours. But of course they're working on a commercial level, and they've got to just use what they've got. Swedish bakery are making excellent breads in Nelson. Yeah, Swedish bakery. Then I can tell you lots of places out of Nelson. Yeah, but if you can learn how to make it yourself, which I know it takes a bit of time, I make all our own bread for my family now. I make a loaf every day or second day, and I'm using all organic grain, mostly New Zealand grown, and it's cost me $1.50 a loaf. So it's pretty cheap, yeah.
This seems like an appropriate time to perhaps talk about local food, and perhaps what underpins your whole book is eating seasonally and where possible locally. So would you like to elaborate a little bit on that philosophy and then perhaps what we have available here in Nelson?
Okay. I suppose when I was trying to find my place of what my style of food was, it took me a few years to stop listening to the media and what the fads were and what the latest diet was, and just to find what I'm really passionate about. And it sort of snuck up behind me because I was gardening and growing this food, and then I was trying to work out what to name my blog, and I was thinking of all these names, family this and blah, 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 thinking it was all about family food. And I thought, no, actually, even though I certainly don't grow all our own veggies, the heartbeat of my food is that it's what's in season. Either what's in my own garden, or if it's not in my own garden, it's what I'm getting from the markets. And it's actually at the time I wasn't working a lot. So this was 5 years ago when I started my website. I wasn't working a lot, and we didn't have a huge amount of money. And so it was actually, I found it quite an economical way to be feeding my family, to grow, of course, when there's you end up eating a lot of silver beet and parsley because that's really easy to grow. And we have this quarter acre which we inherited with some beautiful fruit trees on it, thank you. One of the old owners. We've got grapevines growing in the sunroom.
At our age, we use the word previous.
What's that?
We use the word previous at our age.
Previous. Old, not old, sorry. Previous owner. Thank you for pulling me up. And so I realised that I'm, and I think from a sustainable approach as well, eating in season, it just makes sense sustainably, and also flavour-wise, that's going back to my chefing, food in season just tastes so much better. Even if it's not from my own garden, if I go to the market or a friend gives me something, it's just got flavour. It tastes so good. Tomatoes in February, straight, warm from the sun, you just can't beat them.
No, and also it does last so much longer. It's extraordinary. I don't know what happens in the supermarket, but it doesn't last.
They're picking a lot of things, often quite green, unripe, and so they can last. It does. Yeah, that's right.
But just broadening the conversation from our own gardens to maybe what we've got available here locally in Nelson. We seem to be living in, sometimes I think it's, as far as food goes, it's a paradise. There's a basket of beautiful fish, which is so very hard to access. Your fruits, vegetables, it's a food bowl.
We are in a fruit bowl. I forget that when I travel, when I'm teaching, say, Wellington, where people don't have as good access because of the weather to produce. I'm talking about, beautiful tomatoes and all these, if I do my preserving workshops up there, and people are like, well, we just really struggle to access that stuff. We are so lucky in Nelson, and making the most of it. So I'll preserve a lot of the food from our own garden, but I'll also, go out and just look for, and from my upbringing, from when as we were growing up, we'd go out driving around Richmond and get boxes and boxes and boxes of seconds. I don't think seconds are seconds. Seconds are like perfect, ready to be eaten and preserved. Yeah.
And I think we've normalised that you go out. Then there's, I love just the box. People sell it. I live in Upper Murtry, so there's very few roads that don't have someone selling something.
Yeah.
And it's often just such wonderful produce, and the prices are extremely reasonable. And also I want to support them, and I love the idea that there should be something in our lexicon, which is when they've run out of their walnuts, they just hang a sack over the sign. Yeah. And that should be something like, he's hung a sack over it.
Don't have to stop.
It should be part of what we do.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
Has anybody or anyone out here ever thought of doing food tours, because we do have so much, that as a... Oh, sorry, there's a question. That was a wave. Yeah,
me.
Good. Has anybody thought of doing food tours?
Yeah, I suppose I probably crossed my mind at one stage. It could. I think And the other thing I notice when I'm out teaching is people just love Nelson. They just, oh, I'd love to live in Nelson. You're so lucky. So yeah, I think food tours would be quite, potentially if someone wants to start a tourism business, you could, because there's, I mean, you've got the markets, but you've got, amazing producers out there as well. There's some amazing cheeses. Well, I suppose some of them are from more Marlborough.
Kakura cheese.
Kakura cheese, and then you've got the cranky goat, but then you've got Wangapeka, and then you've got the sheep, there's Vio Vio, and there's Torvald, so we've got, olive oil. I mean, you can pretty much go to the market or do a zip around town, and I can often look at my plate I'm having for dinner, and it's virtually all locally grown. Some from the garden, some from the market. Some, you've got olive oil on tap from Prego or at the market. And you
can add wonderful craft
lucky.
beer and wine.
Beer, wine, everything.
Well.
Yeah, hadn't talked about mention that.
Well, no, it's not. Wasn't
and hops growing in Nelson and grapes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we are very blessed. There's also so much potential out there because some of the traditional foods, because we live in Upper Moutere, which is of German heritage, and that's only just starting to creep back, because as part of that, the bell curve of colonisation is that you reject what you brought out, and then you have to come back to the stage where you and celebrate it again. And the village, which was called Sourdoughs, but during World War I particularly, a lot of the names were anglicised. So Sourdoughs became Upper Moutere and Rosenthal became Rosedale and all those sorts of things. But there is a move in my area to reclaim some of that German heritage. And you can see that in some of the foods. The house that we live in was the second house in the property, and they were very sturdy. When we moved in, there was no hot water. The kitchen was out on the veranda. And there was a long drop, which in actual fact was quite a short drop. And there was it was electricity in 2 rooms, which they must have forked out for and said, that's all you need. You can go and read your book down in those 2 rooms. So they were sturdy, those German settlers. Yeah. But as far as food goes, they were wonderful. And I remember one of the sons of the settlers, I was talking to him, he remembers his mother. He said she was a great sewer, and she had one of those treadle sewing machines, and she kept it oiled because she made the sacks for her sausages on the sewing machine and stitched them up and then stuffed them with pork. So it was oiling the machine. Okay. Yeah. But there are potential, nobody here is pickling hop shoots, which is a very English traditional thing to do, and the same thing you can do with grape.
As well, I just heard about it this week.
What is?
Oh, the hop tips.
Oh,
do you talk about hop tips?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Nobody's doing it. Let's do it. So,
yeah. Maybe somebody out here is thinking about it.
Well, they taste a wee bit like asparagus. Yeah, and you just pickle them like in probably a light vinegar.
It's quite labour intensive, apparently. I just learnt this week. That's why nobody's probably doing it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hops going in.
Yeah.
There's hops from Upper Moutere to Motueka at the moment. Yeah. Well, it's just about time for questions. So before we do that, I was going to ask Nicola her favourite place to eat in Nelson. Any recommendations?
Well, because I cook a lot at home, we don't go out that often. There are some good places. For a casual meal, we'll go to Nicola's Cantina, and then Matt Botery's Urban, for a sort of more fusion style, I suppose. And then, we like our sushi. Eco sushi's got really great quality sushi.
And wafu?
What's that?
Wafu?
Yeah, I haven't been there yet. I was meant to, but haven't made it. Yeah, to be honest, we just don't go out that often. I tend to eat out more when I travel. Yeah. Because I have often just me, so you don't have the kids to have to get a babysitter for. So there's some amazing places happening in Auckland or Wellington. And the more, I suppose, what's my food of eating in the season and using what's local. Not that I don't like local cafes, I just tend to not go out that often.
But that trend perhaps hasn't quite, in Christchurch they've got Roots, which is and Pasture in Auckland we talked about the other day. Yeah, but it will happen.
It will happen. I think we're always a little bit behind the big cities in Nelson. We're ahead, I think, in what we have access-wise here, and that's why we're incredibly lucky to have amazing access to produce here. But the movement of eating local and really highlighting local products and produce on the menu. Certainly Pop Goods and Urban are, and I'm sure other places are doing that to a degree, but Orphan's Kitchen in Auckland, I'll never forget that meal just because it was just literally, there was honey from their roof, there was yacon with salt from Hauraki, and it was just, it blew my mind, even though it was incredibly simple. Yeah.
I think that there is also, maybe, just correct me if I'm wrong, that we're all here because we like cooking, and that's sometimes, I think,
and eating, yes.
That's right. But that's so true. But I sometimes wonder whether the rise in the quality of home cooking has not been necessarily generous to the food industry outside of that, because one, we're quite critical eaters when we're out, not in a trip advisory sort of a way, but in a it was really nice, but that's what I do on Wednesday. I did last Wednesday, whatever.
Yeah.
So you become a different eater. And I was talking to Nicola the other day, many, many years ago. Tim and I did a vintage in Burgundy, and I came home, and I wasn't being snippish, but I did say, no, one of the good cooks only eat 12 things, and they do have a very repetitive diet. And whereas I think most of us in this room would be amazed how many cuisines you absorb over a month, and I would suggest it would be somewhere between 20 and 30. Without even thinking about it, you do Moroccan, you do Chinese, you do Japanese, we do Indian, we do Thai, we do Vietnamese, and we just normalise that. So perhaps the development for the New Zealand cuisine style has suffered because of that.
Yeah, trying to fit into too many boxes, like, this particular meal I had. There was nothing really, there was definitely no fusion going on. It was all just what was available locally. Persimmons that had been hung and dried for 3 months. But to me, I just so appreciated, because I knew how much time would go into producing a lot of these products. And it was very simple. The ingredients, there weren't 10 different ingredients on a plate, it was 2 or 3. The complication of food. And I mean, often, a couple of times a week, our meal will just be literally condiments from the fridge, so sauerkrauts and some eggs from the chickens, a big salad from the garden, and maybe something else, some cheeses I picked up from the market. And it sounds like, oh, that's kind of boring, but actually it's so delicious because it's just all so fresh. And it took me like 10 minutes to get on the table, which I really like. Yeah,
totally. So we're good. Question time has started.
So considering probiotics and things.
Yeah, I make,
It's in the book.
Seasonally I make kombucha. I've just rested mine. Yeah. And kombucha's one I sort of think of as a little bit like cherry on the top. Not cherry on the top. People say to me, I really want to get into fermenting. What would you recommend starting with? And I'd always say sauerkraut. Kombucha is tricky to get right, really tricky to get right, and tricky to get it to the point that it's a health tonic versus a fizzy drink, a soft drink. Yeah, because it's hard to get that balance of where the sugar has been completely consumed and the tea, and that it's actually become a full probiotic. And some that I've tried from friends and some that I've tried commercially, they're way too on the sweet side. So to me, it's not a health food. So yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah.
Have you ever done anything with
Potatoes, fermenting potatoes. Yeah, I haven't yet. I sort of was not really into potatoes for a few years, so I've just got back into them again. So I haven't tried anything with potatoes. Yeah. Put in a grating of potato. Yeah. Well, potato water. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some tricks you can use if you're having trouble. And yeah, I haven't heard potato water. I've heard grape, like making a raisin water with raisins to get the yeast off the raisins. So just grate a little bit into some water, or cooking. What would you cook it? Cooking potato. Yeah. The water cooking. Okay, that's interesting that there'd be. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So like Riwana or yeah. I've just been in a conversation with someone about that recently. I'd really like to try it. Do you have a starter for that? You just do it. Just so. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I have to try it. Yeah. Thank you.
There's one question at the back there. Was it?
Sorry.
Yes.
Nicola, you were saying that you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, I put lids on them. Yeah, yeah, and it gets pretty smelly. The kimchi is quite stinky. Yeah. There's times where I open up the fridge. I find I don't tend to have too much of a problem with it. And the lids I use, the Pix the plastic white peanut butter ones that come on the one, and you just go to the Pix stall and you just say, "Have you got any lids?" And they'll give you 10 for free, and they seal up quite nicely. You do get a little bit of a smell, but I suppose I'm just used to it. It's just, people come around and go, "Sorry about the smell in my fridge," but it's not too bad. Yeah. Kia ora.
My sister and I chucked in our really good jobs a couple of years ago. Our maiden name was Puha.
Okay.
And
Nice.
for a long time, our Irish mother took us foraging
Mm-hmm.
for Puha, mainly for
Yep.
our Māori father, who
Yeah.
liked the boiler. We're not so keen on the boiler.
Okay.
So we're really passionate about Puha
Mm-hmm.
and just the antioxidant
Mm.
levels
Goodness.
in
Yeah.
us. So that's what we do. We're Puha sisters, making Puha pesto.
I like it. Yeah.
Pork and Puha.
Yeah. Where are you? Okay. Yeah.
And it's delicious.
I haven't tried it. Yeah. I have
It's
to
the
come and
pesto
try
pesto,
it.
I think
Yeah.
you put on the label. Is that right?
Pesto.
Yeah, she's got a sister who's another sister who did that, Sibley the Besto or something, I don't know. But anyway, what we've noticed is in our wider whānau, the cost of food in this country is just unbelievably over the top.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I went to England last year and couldn't get over how much cheaper it was here.
Mm-hmm.
So the starters, the rewana starters, teaching my nieces and nephews, to get those things up and running. It's been such a journey. Your book is so helpful.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't know, it's just going to make...
The cost
I
of
think it's how we're going to have to... Because they're on struggle street. Working their butts off.
Yeah. They don't have time probably to get in the garden. Yeah.
It's liberating this new, well, it's not so new, but just an appreciation of weeds, is
Yeah.
it a weed or
Yeah.
is it a feed?
Yeah. There's an amazing amount of food you can eat in your garden, but we just don't know what it is. We don't know what. I'm very grateful many years ago when not that old, but 15 years ago when I first came back from travelling, I ended up volunteering at the Brook Waimarama, not sanctuary, so the community gardens up there. And there was an amazing guy there called John. Anybody know his last name? Say it again? Thank you. Is he here? No, I don't think he lives in Nelson anymore. And I would go up there on a Wednesday and they'd make these amazing big salad bags, which they sold to the community. And I learnt from him all this food you can harvest. And I'm so grateful for that because I can go out to my garden. I've got lettuce and things like that, but I can then go and pick some more chickweed, mallow, and yeah, I don't feel confident enough to be teaching people that myself, but if there's anybody out there who could start that as a tour or even just as a local or community gardens, it's just amazing what you can eat from your backyard that we just...
On that note, we live
realise.
just down the road from Neudorf Mushrooms, and he's the most generous, wonderful person. And so he's appalled that we eat so little of the mushrooms that are available, and so he's quite happy for us to ring up. We just take something up, and he'll say either yes or say no.
Oh, great.
And it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of the mushrooms
Say no.
that have been poisonous do look like this. It's got a vague green aura to them. It's
Yeah,
interesting
slimy,
that you
sort of
feel like
sheen.
you
Yeah.
think I wouldn't naturally put that.
Yeah.
So, question at the back.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, Colette. Colette? Yeah. Oh, is that Miles and Colette? No, who are you talking about? No, I think I've got somebody else here. Oh, yeah, Lynn and Richard. Yes. Okay. Yep. Okay. She does? Small, yeah. Those who missed that, it's Small Beginnings. There's a website that you can do weed harvesting and, yeah, okay. Great. Who?
Well, let's go to you at the back, yes?
Yeah. Launch? Yeah.
Launched earlier this year, it was in winter, and so you gave me some starter,
Yeah.
and I've coddled your
Yeah.
olives.
Nice. Oh, good. Yeah.
But I've been making you no knead grainy.
The seeded bread.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I make a double recipe
Yeah.
of it. I cook the two
Yeah.
tins,
Yeah.
cut it in half and put it in the
Yeah.
freezer. And I really buy bread now
Yeah.
because it is just so delicious.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a good. I don't make that one as much, but it is. Yeah, it is easy. That one's really easy. You just mix it up and put it in the tin, pretty much. Yeah. Thank you.
And there's
Yeah.
one in the front here.
Yeah.
I wonder whether, is there one recipe on page in your book that you're really pleased with? The layout and the recipe.
Pass me. Just asking, is there one particular recipe page in my book that I'm really proud of? That is I was thinking something like that. Yeah.
I think
So
we
I
might
did.
have just glossed over the fact that Nicola took all the
That's
photographs.
a good one. Yeah, so I did photograph most of my book myself. So this is one of my favourite photos. So it's a boiled lemon and coconut loaf. Yeah. So, but my sister took all the lovely photos of me. But I have to say I'm very proud of. Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm really proud of lots of the pages in the book. I don't know. I do like the sourdough. The rustic sourdough. I'm just trying to find the one here. The whole section on sourdough I love, actually. It's just really homely and yeah.
Because that shows me what mine should be like.
Yeah, that's the bread. Yeah, that's the bread one. Yeah. And actually the preserving section I'm really proud of as well. I don't know, I think, that's a really hard one to answer, sorry. Yeah, what it looks like. Yeah. A little bit lighter in colour. I did find that photo came out a bit dark. Yeah, thank you.
I wanted to ask you, Nicola, about baking and about sugar substitutes. So we sort of demonised white sugar, but is coconut sugar or rice syrup, they're all
Yeah.
processed.
I talk about that in my book. I've got a whole page that's dedicated to sugar, and I say basically I'm not really a sugar-free person or an anti-sugar person. Any sugar that you're going to use, whether it's coconut sugar, white sugar, rice syrup, I mean, they all have sort of different properties, I suppose, and some people are quite sensitive to fructose, and that's why you might look at using rice syrup, but they're all sweeteners. So the way I cook sweet things is I like the produce, or there should be a highlight of the sweet foods, whether it's some fresh produce I'm using or the boiled lemon, and that should really sing, and then I'm just adding enough sweetness so that it's a sweet food. But I think I did very briefly touch on this earlier, that after World War II we had this huge amount of sugar available, and suddenly we went from using honey or just a small amount of sweetener to 3 or 4 times the amount. And it's personally, when I eat something that sweet, I don't actually enjoy it. It makes me feel a bit icky afterwards. But that's, I suppose, my palate's changed over the years. So I don't know. Does that answer your question? I don't think there's any particularly really one sugar's healthier than the other. I mean, certainly unrefined, say Rapadura, is better than white sugar. I mean, my personal choice is honey. I use honey a lot because I can get it from my neighbours. It's just across the fence, and we want to have our own hives eventually. But that doesn't go off everything. Honey doesn't go well in everything you cook. So yeah, I'm not completely against sugar at all. I just think let the food sing, let the produce sing, let the main ingredients sing, rather than it just having to be teeth-tingling sweet. Yeah.
We've got time for one more question, right in the middle.
Hi, kefir. I've been made 2 ways, one with grains and one with the powder culture that you get in the organic shop. What's the difference in the probiotic benefits of both?
The probiotic would be pretty similar. The thing is that the grains will just keep replicating, and you don't need to go and buy the powder. Yeah. So I'm more for in my whole book, I don't use any starter cultures or anything, that you have to go and buy a little packet of something, because you don't actually have to. If you, with milk kefir, the grains, the kefir grains, they just keep replicating and growing, and so you don't need it. You don't need that powder. The powder means that it's sort of like a one serve. Okay, so how does, I must be thinking of something else then. How does it? Yeah. Okay. Do you just scoop out a tablespoon and use it for the next one? Yeah. Is there any grains in it, or is it just a powder? Yeah, but eventually it must run out of, yeah. So I actually haven't come across the powder. I've only ever used the grains because it's sort of a hand-me-down, but I know that, not everyone can access them. So, but probioticness, both got kefir has bacteria and yeast, so it's much more higher in probiotics than yogurt. So yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Well, that's the end. It's our lunch hour. Lovely lunch hour's over. Thank you very much, and thank Nicola. I think it's inspiring, and also what I found from the book is there's a huge amount of confidence. There's no reason. She doesn't give you a reason why you can't do it. She gives you lots of reasons why you can. It does require some mild scheduling in your life, but that sort of construct is probably not a bad thing. But it's wonderful. Thank you for talking. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for writing the book.
Thanks, Judy.